evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order, the Planning Commission meeting for December 14th, 2022 at 6:03 p.m. And can I get the clerk to call the roll, please?
Commissioner Diedrich,
Here.
Commissioner Madrid,
Here.
Commissioner Thomas,
Here.
Vice Chair Ledoux,
Here.
and Chair White.
Here. Okay, and Commissioner Randy, can I get you to lead us in the pledge of allegiance?
Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving through the agenda. On to no presentations tonight, and on to the agenda approval. Can I ask, are there any modifications to the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, can I ask the commissioners for approval of tonight's agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moving on to item public comments. Are there any public comments, Chair, from the floor? Is there anyone from the floor that would like to speak?
There are none.
Anyone from the floor? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into our approval of the minutes. Could I ask the Planning Commission for the approval of the November 9th, 2022 minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on to the consent calendar. No items, and now for all of the items, let's get to 9.1, the Quail Hills tentative track map, number PLN 21-0057. This is item 9.1, and could the planning manager introduce this item, please?
Thank you. Good evening, Chair. I would like to introduce Brett Hamilton that will be doing the presentation for tonight. Unfortunately, Brandon wasn't going to be able to be here today, so Brett is helping out.
Thank you, Brett. Floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair White and members of the Planning Commission. We do have the Quail Hills tentative track map here before you tonight. So starting off, we'll just start off where it's located. So we are west of Getz Road and east of Williams Drive. The property takes up roughly between 44-45 gross acres. So it's a pretty big piece of land up there in Quail Valley. So jumping into the description, again, it's about 44.7 acres. It is proposed to be a gated community and be subdivided into 130 single-family lots. So that would give a density for the project of 2.9 dwelling units per acre, which is right about in the middle of what's allowed in the zoning designation of 2.1 to 5. So the minimum lot size proposed, each lot is at least 5,000 square feet. There'd be different recreational amenities provided, such as a tot lot, dog park, and then of course the water quality basin, which does kind of double as a recreational amenity, as we'll see a little bit later on here. So with the total project site, because it is taking advantage of the cluster development standards, the project is proposing to conserve about 11.7 acres of natural open space that will not be touched as part of the project. So due to the topography and the slopes that are on the project site, they're going to be able to preserve those through utilizing the cluster development. So as was mentioned earlier, the general plan designation for the site, it's got a little bit of a dual designation. Primarily, it is the 2.1 to 5 residential dwelling units per acre. And then at the north side, where you've got kind of some of those steeper slopes, it is currently designated rural mountainous. And the zoning matches up with the low-density residential and rural mountainous standards. So for the access on the site, obviously we can see the different layout of the project. We've got two primary points of access, both located on Getz Road. The southerly access point would be right in, right out only. And then the northerly one right there in the center of the project would be full access, all movements. And then towards the back, over there on Williams Drive, one of the properties was acquired so that they could have another third point of access for emergency vehicles only. So Obviously there's not going to be any of the, residents that would be utilizing that. They'd only be utilizing gets. So landscaping for the project, as was mentioned, almost 12 acres of the site would be conserved as natural open space, surrounding kind of the entire site. As you can see, there's good separation really on all sides, both to the north, the south, the west, to really kind of conserve the space, but also provide for quite a bit of landscaping. So as you can see there, a little bit over 40% of the site area would be either open space or landscaped. So with those amenities that we were talking about earlier, so that tot lot, it would be just under an acre of usable park space. Would include basketball courts, covered picnic area, the tot lot, splash pad. So a lot of different amenities provided. And then the dog park would be broken up into 2 different sections, one for the larger dogs, one for the smaller dogs. And then as was mentioned earlier, the basin will have a trail around it. So if you go from essentially where the dog park's at, you could follow that trail all the way down to the basin. And if you're curious, you'd get about 5 laps around there and get you a mile. All right, so jumping in a little bit more to the cluster development. So obviously the LDR2 zone does have a minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet. But as was mentioned, this development will be providing a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. So that's all to do with these cluster development standards that are outlined, and all the different criteria and requirements for cluster development are in the code there. They meet all of those different requirements. So one of the primary things that is required to kind of utilize the cluster development is they've got to basically conserve at least 25% of the site as natural open space. So for this project, they're a little bit over 26% is being preserved. So they're also not allowed to have a greater density than what they normally would if they were to just develop the whole site. So the 130 lots is essentially what they'd be able to get, still within the allowed density range. But again, the purpose of the cluster development standards is to essentially preserve open space, to keep some of those slopes, to not have to, dig into those and kind of destroy that natural landscape. So the project is proposed on the flattest areas of the site, while also maintaining all of that open space, again, kind of designing and being in harmony with the natural features and the natural landscape out there at the site. And as mentioned, it reduces the lot size, which is allowed per the standards. Doesn't increase the overall density, it's the same. And again, a minimum preservation of the 25%, which they show that the 26.2% of natural space preserved. Another big item with the project would be sewer infrastructure. So as you know, the Quail Valley area is lacking on different sewer infrastructure. It's slowly coming. This project would extend the sewer in the area, which could allow for obviously potential properties in the area or nearby to then connect to that sewer. So this is a great investment in the area to bring that sewer infrastructure in. There's 2 different options that has not been determined exactly which one would be utilized. The first option would come through one of the cul-de-sac areas of the existing development to the south and come across an easement if approval can be granted. The second option would be to go where the sewer infrastructure currently exists on Getz Road and extend it all the way up to the project site. So there was some community outreach with the Quail Valley Community Group. The applicant could speak a little bit more to this if desired. And then we've also got, for the environmental determination, there was an initial study and mitigated negative declaration prepared for the project. The comment period did go from October 6th to October 26th. We did receive a comment letter from California Department of Fish and Wildlife just a little bit after the comment period ended, but obviously we have a good working relationship with them. So as part of their comment letter, they had made some suggestions to a couple of the mitigation measures in the ISMND, specifically related to the biological So the biological, the first and second mitigation measures relating to nesting birds and burrowing owl. Essentially, their comments wanted to provide additional specifics if burrowing owl or nesting bird were to be found on the site. So the city did incorporate the large majority of their recommendations to change those mitigation measures. So those have been updated and reflected in the packet that's been provided to you tonight and in the agenda for everybody else. All right, so the recommendation is to adopt a resolution to adopt the initial study and mitigate negative declaration and the mitigation monitoring and reporting program, and another resolution approving the tentative track map 37692, subject to all the conditions of approval and findings in the staff report and resolution. So that concludes staff's presentation. We're available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brett. So we'll bring it back to the commissioners for any questions for staff for this item. Commissioner Thomas.
Yeah, it's may affect this project. I read somewhere, and I can't remember exactly where, didn't we get recently a grant or some funding for completion of the sewers in Quail Valley, separate from this project? Wasn't there some more funding or some plan on that?
Commissioner Thomas, EMWD has been working on bringing additional sewer amenities to that area. I believe the recent funding you're referring to is for additional studies for future phases.
Studies. There was an actual, okay. And is there any, since they're bringing this connection in, will it allow isn't there still a moratorium on it there, on building as far as the other lots, all the accordion lots out there, as far as, because they're all in sewer?
Yeah, so there's two different sub-areas still within Quail Valley. So one of them being sub-area 4, just directly to the west of this project site, that, yeah, is still part of the moratorium, is required to connect to sewer. So this coming up further north will definitely help, I think, especially if additional funding, is granted with the MWD. That could potentially, with this coming in, be a really good way to connect those areas so that development can occur.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Dietrich.
I've got two. For the entrances and exits, so I see one of them's right in, right out only. Are either one of them going to be controlled or on gets?
Commissioner Diedrich, yes, the northern, I don't know if you can bring up an exhibit, the northern entrance will be a traffic signal in the future. Their entrance to their subdivision lines up with the collector roadway on the circulation element to the east. So ultimately, there will be a traffic signal there.
Great, thank you. And then one more question. So the parks and the amenities that are going in, are those going to be within or outside of the gates?
So the parks would be located inside the gates of the project. So, okay. So right here at the north end of the site, that's where the tot lot would be located. And then on the south end, the dog park with the basin with kind of the loop around it. So it would be within the gated area. However, as you know, the city is currently working on updating their master parks plan that started about 6 months ago in July. There's been, as you know, I think in August, there was a joint workshop with the Planning Commission and the Parks, Rec, and Trails Commission. So the most recent meeting being this month, just on December 1st. So I actually kind of looked into that a little bit. In that meeting, they talked specifically about kind of areas that are lacking in park space, and Quail Valley is definitely on the radar. It's been something that's been discussed, quite heavily. So I think we'll see, and as part of that parks update, additional, obviously focus on looking at those areas that are lacking in park space. So,
Thank you.
Just a follow up on that for the park side. So if it becomes city, it'll be city maintained or HOA maintained.
This would be HOA maintained.
Okay. So under the CFDs and fees for the HOA, they have all that full maintenance.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. So, Mr. City Engineer, this came to Planning Commission, not when I was on it, but maybe 10 years ago or so, and there was a question about site distance. So, do you feel confident that this meets all the site distance criteria, that would be the horizontal site district, on the curvilinear section of the road.
Yes, can you bring up that exhibit again, Brett? Sorry. Yeah, in this stretch of Getz, it's, those curves are not an issue. And then the southern entrance, you know, ultimately there will be a median there, so that entrance is right in, right out only. And then in the straight segment, that's where the traffic signal will be.
Great. And
So
I've
that
been
would eliminate any concerns with the horizontal site distance issues.
okay, and the stacking and all adequate.
Yeah, there is a condition of approval that that entrance, that northern entrance, where there will be a future traffic signal, that will need to be designed to accommodate the future traffic signal and to minimize potential modifications to that infrastructure in that intersection.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Thomas, do you have a
Yeah.
follow-up?
I just follow-up question on the park thing. So you were saying, I was a little confused. It's gonna be an HOA park, but is the goal ultimately to dedicate it to the city and it take it over? No?
No, that's not the ultimate goal. I guess I kind of went a little off tangent. So obviously the parks within this development would serve the 130 units and lots within the development. It's not intended to be dedicated over to the city. It would continue to be HOA maintained. I guess what I just meant was, since that is the case here and these residents are being served, obviously the residents, you know, existing currently, the city's updating the parks plan and of course is looking at Quail Valley as an area where we know that there's a need for additional park space.
Thank you. Any additional questions for staff? Okay, let's move on to the public hearing. And I'm going to open the public hearing at 6:20 p.m. and ask the clerk if this hearing was legally noticed and if any correspondence has been received.
It was legally noticed, and we did not receive any correspondence.
Okay. Are there any requests to speak, or is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a public comment at this time?
I have no requests to speak.
Okay. Would the applicant like to speak to the project? Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman White and fellow commissioners. My name is Paul Onifer with Quail Hills Limited Partnership, and we're happy to be here. I can answer some of your questions on the sewer and the site distance. We've been working with staff for the last few years on this project, so we are very pleased that we're here, and we are in agreement with all the terms and conditions of approval laid out in the staff report. As far as the sewer, we've been talking, I had a meeting with EMWD 2 weeks ago. They are studying this entire area, and obviously the regional sewer is a big issue. They have a draft plan about bringing the sewer all the way up from that, on the exhibit it would be option 2, and bringing it all the way up to our boundary. That would be part 1. That is all subject to them getting funding, which they don't have yet. Their plan is to get the plan approved internally, and then they're going to go out for funding in the 3rd quarter of this year, or 2023. And if they do get the funding, then they would do the installation shortly thereafter. The option 1, which it goes through the HOA, we have an agreement with the HOA to go down that route. Right now, I'm just talking to them about tweaking it a little bit just to see if EMWD moves first, then we don't need that connection. But that entire area has been studied in terms of the sewer. The sewer that we're putting in would serve our track and then a few other properties along Getz. If EMWD comes in, they would upsize it and it would serve the entire area, but it won't serve the Quail Hills, the properties farther west. That has to be, that's a whole different.
Whole separate trunk line.
Yeah, exactly. And then as far as the site distance, on the plan and the one southerly entrance, the right in and right out, there is a section that's on the south of the entrance that we have to trim back the slope for sight distance to make sure that that all works. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
It was mentioned earlier that there was some outreach with the Quail Valley Community Group. Can you just speak on that a little
Sure.
bit?
Yeah, I met with was kind of, it's been a while. I met with it was the first meeting that was open after COVID, and we had it at the lodge. There was about 44 people. I think the head count was around 44 people there. A lion's share of the people there were in support of it. There was a few people that, probably about 6, that were objecting primarily because of traffic, but everybody else was in support because they want the sewer. But it was a, I gave the presentation then, and like I said, it was a productive meeting. But their biggest comment was really the sewer and when it was going to be, the project would be built.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, and just for the record, you agree to the conditions of approval of this?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, then I'm going to close the public hearing at 6:24 and bring it back to the commissioners for any additional comments.
I was initially concerned about the small lot size, but in talking to staff, the benefit of having the bigger open space was, kind of offset that smaller lot size. So that was pretty much my only concern. So we're good.
Any other comments? Commissioner Dietrich?
I think these sewer improvements are much needed. I'm excited to see some movement going forward. I would say the main downside I have is I would very disappointed that we're going to get new parks in Quail Valley, but they're going to be behind gates and only for these residents. That's my main issue with the project. But other than that, I'm excited for it.
Okay, Commissioner Thomas? Okay, I have none either. What we do have now are 2 resolutions for adoption. So I'm going to ask for a motion and a second to adopt a resolution adopting a mitigated negative declaration based on the findings incorporated in the initial study and the conclusion that the project will not have a significant effect on the environment. Vote. And the tally. Waiting for the results.
It was adopted.
Okay. I vote. Okay.
Yeah, both of them.
Okay. All righty. And then moving on to item number 2, I need a motion and a second to.
I apologize. It was
did we-
unanimous for both.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All righty. All right, then let's move on to item 9.2, the Boulders Mixed-Use Project, major and minor modifications. This will be item 9.2, and could the planning manager please introduce this item?
Chair White, thank you again. The following item, we have Principal Planner Ryan Fowler that will be giving the presentation.
Good evening, Commission. Ryan Fowler, Principal Planner, here to present the Boulders Mixed Use Project. If you'll remember, this project came before the Planning Commission back in November of last year, 2021. This project before you right now includes a minor and major modification to that previous approval. So it has 2 elements. One is the plot plan major modification, and then there is a conditional use permit minor modification. And we'll get into that, the specifics of that a little bit. later. So just to refresh where the project's located, it's at the northeast corner of Berea Road and Normandy Road, just a little bit north of Newport there and east of the Salt Creek Channel. It's about 10 acres in size. The general plan designation for this project site is EDC, Economic Development Corridor, Newport Road. To the north and to the east is residential designations. To the south is the Audie Murphy Ranch. Specifically, you have the park immediately to the south, and then to the west is more EDC land. Zoning is pretty similar. EDC, Newport Road, residential to the north and to the east, Audie Murphy to the south, and EDC to the west. So let's jump into the project description. The conditional use permit minor modification, it proposes a minor modification to that previous CUP that was approved back in last November of 2021. And it included, the previous approval included a daycare center, and it's shown there at the lower right portion of the project site. At that time, they included 5 classrooms. Now they're proposing 10 classrooms. But it all is contained within essentially the same footprint of what was previously approved, so just smaller classrooms now. But that does bump up a little bit the number of anticipated students from that 120 students to now the 153 students. And then the second part to this project is the major modification to the plot plan. And that's the plot plan that was previously approved at that same hearing as well. And the reason why it's a major modification is they are proposing a 2-level parking structure. You could call it a parking podium. But that boosts up the number of parking stalls provided by 46 stalls. So it goes from that 431 number to 477. And then there's just some small square footage increases to the daycare building and the office building. About 200 additional square feet for the daycare building, and then the office building goes from the 25,745 square foot number of professional general office to then medical office, and it increases in size to that 26,861 square foot number. So this is, I've circled here where the primary changes occur. So it's all within the southerly part of the project site away from the residence to the north, where the commercial is located. So you have on the lower left, the office building, on the lower right, the daycare building. That parking podium that I described, the 2-level parking podium, is there on Normandy Road in between those 2 uses. So on the right-hand side, you see what was previously approved. On the left is what the current proposal is, but if you can't see it very well, this next slide should help. So I've highlighted the area with the most change. Essentially, you can see the parking podium in between. It's the one with the X across it. And then the patio area on the east side of the office building grows a little bit. It widens, so there's more outdoor patio area. And then the configuration of the parking still within that blue shaded area to the east of the parking podium, it gets reconfigured a little bit. But essentially the same footprints for the office building and the daycare building. They are located essentially in the same spots and have the same footprints. And the ingress, the driveway off of Normandy Road is also about in the exact same location. Now, I don't expect to go through all these numbers here, but this is essentially to show how the parking changed, how it increased. The main line where the increase occurred was, you can see about 3/4 of the way down there on the column, the blue column on the left. They go from professional office to medical office, and that's really where the increase in the amount of parking stalls required comes from. So everything else, just changes by a couple spaces here or there. But then for that office building going to a medical use, it bumps up from the 64 spaces to then 107 spaces required. So that's where you get the increase from. And that's why this parking podium is being proposed, is because that is the one space where they could accommodate it, where they could boost the number of parking stalls by 46 spaces. So, and just to kind of reiterate, if we go back to November of 2021, During that hearing, the applicant requested a minor exception or a reduction to the amount of parking that was required. They asked for a 14 space reduction. Now, with the increased total number, they're asking for a 20 space reduction. The total that you can do under our current code is 10%, and they're asking, the 20 represents a 4.2%, so less than half of what is allowable per the code. So
I have a quick question. So they're switching to medical offices. Is there any legal prevention, like, okay, so the plan is to have them all doctors' office type things. But what if the market changes and they start getting offers for insurance and whatever else in there? They can still use those offices for any use, right? This is just really a parking thing more than it's a traffic thing more than it is a rental thing, right?
the ones you described are all allowed by right, so they could switch over and do that other use. The reason why we have to come back now is because medical office has this higher ratio for parking. It has the 1 space per 200, and that's why we're here.
The higher trips per day kind of thing, okay.
Okay. And we'll just walk through a few slides showing the architecture. The applicant prepared these renderings, which this one shows from the corner of Normandy and Berea, looking kind of in a northeasterly direction. There's the corner, that's the office building. You can see to the right or to the east of the office building is where the parking podium would be placed, would be installed. And there's a couple better slides zoomed in of the parking podium, and I'll kind of describe how they aesthetically treated that on those. And here we have a comparison of the previously approved office building. That's in the upper right, and the current proposal is the larger photos. This, essentially they kept the same articulation, very similar amounts of enhanced materials. It changed up the color palette slightly, tried to modernize it a little bit, but it is essentially the same with the same general footprint. And the same holds true for the daycare center. Very similar articulation, same enhanced materials, a lot of the siding, the brick veneer, just slightly different color palette there. And here's the architecture of the parking podium. You see when it originally came in, it was primarily just the concrete color around the perimeter of it. Now you can see that they added in some brick veneer. You know, particularly the one on the top is what you'd see on Normandy Road, and it has quite a bit of brick veneer, particularly on the corners. The one thing that we want to point out was when you're thinking about this parking podium from Normandy Road, it's not the full 2 stories. It's partially sunken in, so it's as it approaches Normandy Road, it kind of dives into the earth there. So you get about half of the height of the lower level on Normandy Road. And then on the internal side, on the north side, is where it'd be the full 2 stories. So it kind of slopes down into the site. And this gives you a little bit better, so this is from Normandy Road. We're looking at the parking podium, the daycare building on the right, the office building on the left. And then this is probably the best rendering we have showing what it would actually look like from Normandy Road. You see the landscaping in front, brick veneer. It's sunken about halfway down into the earth there. So that's what you'd see. And then this is internal on the north side. So in that main drive aisle, east-west drive aisle, on the north side, this is what you'd see of the parking structure. So you enter the upper level from Normandy Road, and you would enter the lower level from the internal drive aisle. So pertaining to CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, there's no further environmental documentation required per CEQA, and all the potential significant impacts were previously analyzed in that initial study and mitigated negative declaration that went before you guys, went before the commission on November 2021. And so at this time, staff is recommending the commission determine that no further environmental documentation is required under CEQA, and they adopt a resolution approving conditional use permit number minor modification number PLN 22-0119 and plot plan major modification PLN 22-0120, subject to the attached conditions of approval and based upon the findings and conclusions incorporated in the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Ryan. Commissioners, any comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Vice Chair Ledoux.
Can we please go back to the parking requirement matrix? It wasn't clear to me. I just want to be clear on what we're going from professional office to medical office. How many parking spaces are required versus how many are going to be provided?
So there's not really a provided per line item. The provided is on the far right-hand column, and it's only just the total that's required. So in total, for the whole entire project, they're meeting the requirement. But the one line item for the medical, that's just the required amount. So it goes from 64 for the professional office to 107, but they're meeting that throughout the entire site.
So you're saying that there are 475 spaces that are required, and they're going to provide 475 spaces?
Correct.
Is that
with the minor exception, yes.
And how many spaces is that approximately with the exception?
Well, the minor exception is the 20 spaces. So they otherwise, per the code, be required to do 495. They're asking for the 20 space reduction, which brings them down to the 475.
Thank you.
Any other comments for staff? Questions for staff on this item? Okay, no questions then.
Chair, if I could just make a comment, just for the record, that we did receive 2 correspondence. Those have been included in your packet, and we have addressed those comments as well.
Thank you. Randy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I appreciate that the applicant came through, put an extra year into this, did it the right way, and I don't see any changes to anything that we already approved to make a difference. So,
Thank you.
I like it.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing at 6:40 p.m. and ask the clerk here if this hearing was legally noticed and if any correspondence has been received.
Yes, it was legally noticed, and the correspondence was in your blue folders.
Okay, thank you. And are there any requests to speak, or is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a public comment at this time?
I have no requests to speak.
Okay. Any public comments from this? Okay, the applicant like to speak? Would the applicant like to speak? Give an overview for this? Okay. Okay, does the applicant agree to the conditions of approval? You do? Okay, thank you. Okay, then, with no additional comments, I'm going to close the public hearing at 6:41 p.m. and bring this back to the commissioners for any additional comments or discussion. Do we have any, gentlemen?
I think it'll be nice to have some commercial and professional space over there. Be nice to see it built, spread it out, keep it off of Newport and over there.
I mean, we already approved this project for the most part, right? The only major change here realistically is the addition of the parking podium. And I know we have received some correspondence and some issues people have with either the aesthetics or the increased traffic volume from that. But really what we're increasing, 46 stalls, is about a 10% increase to the parking spot that was previously approved. So I don't see a huge drastic increase of traffic with that. And aesthetically, I mean, the fact that it's sunken in on Normandy, there's not much, and what there is seems to be attractive to me. I'm going to see it every day out of my window from my house. I'm going to be seeing it, so I'm okay with it, and I like the project.
I think this is the first parking structure in the entire city, is it not?
I understand.
Yeah. Big time. We're getting big time now.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Ben said. I live over in this area, and I drive through that intersection at Normandy and Berea every single day going to school. So I just want that on the record that I'm going to be part of experiencing that traffic, and it doesn't worry me. I'm excited about the project having it over on our side of city, so.
Commissioner Thomas? Anything? And I think the minor changes that we're making and that major change is not enough to cause any concern for me also. I'd be looking forward to the project as the other commissioners, especially the ones that have to live next to it, so. Okay, so we have one resolution for adoption, and I'm going to ask for a motion in a second to adopt a resolution that finds no further environmental documentation is required under the California Environment Quality Act, CEQA, for plot plan major modification number PLN 22-120 and approving conditional use permit minor modification number PLN 22-0119 and plot plan major modification number PLN 22-0120, subject to the attached conditions of approval and based upon the findings and conclusions incorporated in the staff vote. For that. Okay, we have a first and a second. Waiting for the voting. It's still waiting on mine.
We just need your vote.
Yeah,
If you could just-
yay on
Okay.
mine, so you can add that in. I'm good.
So that passed unanimously.
Okay, unanimously. Okay, thank you much. Okay, moving on to item 9.3, Menifee Village, PA 4-6, tentative track map 37671. This is item 9.3, and could the planning manager introduce this item for us?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. Staff would like to request that the commission continue this item to a date certain of January 11th of next year. We need a little bit more time to discuss a few items with the applicant, so our request is that we continue this item.
Okay, then I'm going to ask for a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to January the 11th of 2023. And that passes 5-0. Okay, moving on to discussion items. 10.1, new legislation update. Amazing, we get this every year.
I'm nervous. All right. Can we get the presentation up, please? So,
More mandates, right?
well, you knew exactly where I was going. Yes. So this presentation, we try to give you an update, especially the Planning Commission, on new state mandates that affect your work. So a lot of it is housing, planning, things like that. It is a little bit long. Luckily, we had Director Kitzrow, who did shorten it a little bit. I just want to tell you everything, and actually, it was shortened quite a lot. It will be much of really a summary. It's just so you know what's in the atmosphere, and staff will be working very closely with the city attorney's office to ensure that we comply with all of these deadlines, these mandates, and roll with the punches, as you will, because a lot of these are so new that there are no court cases or anything to really help us interpret some of the requirements that the state is placing upon us. All right. Ooh, it buzzes when I go next. So the first one is AB 2097, and it's regarding parking requirements near transit. And really what it is, it abolishes parking minimum mandates. I know it sounds very scary, but it only applies to projects within half-mile public transit. And public transit isn't every single bus stop. It does sound like that, but really what it is specific areas, existing rail, rapid transit stations, or intersection of 2 bus routes of 15 minutes or less. So we don't really have those here in the city, so it is not as dire for us when we're approving projects. But just know that that is out there, and that as the state start implementing more transit routes and things like that, it may affect future development here in the city. We are, and cities are able to make exceptions to that, but you do have to have evidence of a substantially negative impact on a variety of issues. Again, we're not there yet here in the city of Menifee, but just be aware that if the city wants to deviate away from that prohibition, we'd have to make some pretty substantive findings. Yes.
The city center project where the courthouse is going, is that already a done deal, or is that gonna reduce the required parking because of this legislation?
As far as I know, this legislation is not retroactive. And then, of course, there's always an exception to an exception, and then they are listed here. Again, not applicable necessarily in this case, but be aware. All right, we have the questions. Anything else? Okay, the next one, which was the big boogeyman up in the state, it's AB 2011. And it has a sister legislation, which is SB 6, which I'll discuss next. But essentially what the Affordable Housing and High Roads Jobs Act of 2022, really a big mouthful, does is it allows ministerial approval of two types of developments: 100% affordable housing developments in commercial zones, or ministerial approval of mixed-use housing developments along commercial corridors. So again, it sounds quite scary because it's about, you get a lot of projects that come to the Planning Commission here in the city of Menifee. What this does, it would say it's a staff level decision because we're just checking boxes. However, there are strict timelines that staff would have to apply. But again, it really depends on the type of product that developers are interested in developing here in the city. And so in order to meet these ministerial standards, the project would have to meet site requirements as well as project requirements. And they're quite extensive, so I won't go over every single one. But for the site, for example, zones for office, retail, and parking. That's a lot of zones here in the city, right? It also does require, that a third of the square footage is not near a site that's industrial use. It's not on prime farmland. There's specific requirements for specific plant areas, and it does have areas that prohibit it from development on vacant sites with cultural resources and high fire zones. And for the project, they really did have to meet a lot of requirements to fall under AB 2011 ministerial approval. There are two types, as I mentioned. The first is 100% affordable, right? It has to be multifamily. It has to have pretty high density of 30 units per acre. It has to have a deed restriction, not near a freeway, no net loss of residential units. And the other thing is that objective standards for that parcel is frozen at the time of submittal. And finally, and interestingly, they have tenant protections, relocation assistance, and the right of return or first refusal in some instances. So the state is really bringing down the hammer on trying to find ways to build 100% affordable housing throughout the state. On top of that, next you have the mixed income housing, right? So you have to meet all the requirements for the site requirements for affordable, and it has to be a frontage along a commercial corridor. So a commercial corridor is basically any public street that's 70 to 150 feet wide. It's not a freeway. And size of the acres 20 feet or less, no net loss or demolition of affordable housing, and no destruction of historic structures and things like that. And the project, again, has to meet all of these requirements. For example, it has to have a certain number of affordable units, even though it's mixed use. It has to meet certain density requirements. It has height requirements. And interestingly, it's no setback requirements on the frontage along a commercial corridor. So they're really trying to allow these developers to maximize the space and development on some of these lots. And again, not near a freeway or an oil and natural gas refinery. Again, you have some additional requirements as to, some environmental assessments, not getting rid of any bicycle, electrical vehicle requirements. And then finally, and importantly for a lot of cities and local jurisdictions, is that we can apply objective standards, which includes a mandate that half of the ground floor be dedicated to commercial use, right? A lot of jurisdictions were concerned that if you're converting commercial property into, residential property, you lose your tax base. And so by allowing half of the first floor that was dedicated to residential into commercial, you can still recapture some of that loss. And here it lists a number of density requirements. It's quite high, right? 30, 40, 60, or even up to 80 units per acre for sites within a half mile of a major transit stop. I don't believe we have any of those here in the city, but as Menifee continues to grow, as public transit become more interesting to the state, it's just something to keep in mind. There are processing requirements. This is going to be a refrain that you see from these state mandates. No longer is the state saying, hey, this is something you should do. It's saying you have to do this, and you have to do it by the time we tell you, right? And so in general, we have to look at, what they're submitting. And if we don't think it complies with what we require, we have to tell the developer within 60 days or 90 days, depending on what size the project is. And for failure to do that, it's deemed compliant. So no longer that failure to submit everything, if the city, say, short-staffed or whatever, it can result in a project being approved or an application being deemed complete. And what you see here on the left is that, say someone is missing some material, right? What this states is that there's substantial evidence. If a reasonable person says, okay, they were missing a couple forms, but really they complied with everything, I can infer reasonably that they met those standards, we would have to approve that. But the city does still have design review, and again, there are limits to do the 90-day and 180-day requirement, but that is not in addition to the original timeline. So you have to do the design review all within the 90 days, including staff review and whatnot. So it's quite fast. And what really helped this push over the edge, because there was a lot of drama if you were reading the news, is that there are some labor requirements. So it has to meet prevailing wage. Contractors have to report that they're complying with some of these prevailing wage requirements, report to the city, and apprenticeship requirements. And the city has, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But so as you can see, there are a lot of requirements for someone who wants to fall under that. But for those who do, they don't have to go through a zone change. They don't have to go to his planning commission. There's no public hearing on that. So the sister, legislation is SB 6. It's the Middle Class Housing Act of 2022, and it is a discretionary development. However, there are still an extensive list of requirements for the city, but essentially it's still going to be multifamily. It's going to have a lot of the same requirements as, not near an oil refinery and things like that. However, it is in a zone allowed for office, retail, and parking as a principally permitted use. And it doesn't have the same requirement for, affordability. Other project requirements include, for example, prohibiting short-term rentals, because this is a mixed-use project, right? It does, again, have to have skilled and trained workforce, and what it does also allow is the 50% of square footage be mixed-use or residential without transient lodging. Okay, and you can have an exception to this. And this exception basically allows the city to say, okay, developer, you want to build in parcel A. Well, we really want to save parcel A for commercial, right? We can find another area for you to build, and you have to allow them to build pursuant to SB 6, and you have to meet all those requirements. But you do have to make finding supported by substantial evidence with one of these two requirements. So density bonuses and CEQA still apply. So you do have to go to the public hearing. They might still need an EIR, et cetera, but it's not eligible for SB 35 permit streamlining if it's already benefited from that before. And so what is the city's doing here? Well, the city has annual reporting requirements to primarily HCD. So we need to talk about what projects are going through under each of these bills. We talk about the labor requirements, which sites they are. So there's going to be more data gathering by the state under a lot of these bills and because they're tracking us. They're making sure, right, the Attorney General and their strike force and HCD and their enforcement arm, they're tracking cities to make sure that we're complying with these requirements. Any questions? Well, first, let me just say that staff and the city attorney's office, we're watching, we're looking at our sites, we're looking what's available and what to watch out for as developments go out throughout the city. So.
Well, you guys have some good job security with all this stuff, and there may come a day where you don't need us anymore. So.
It'll be all automated. The question I have is, it's probably directed to the community development director, or do we have any projects that are in the hopper or ones that that are in place that could possibly be impacted by these two Assembly and this one Senate bill?
No, it's my understanding that the developer or the applicant needs to declare that they are submitting under these pieces of legislation when they submit, so that we know right from the get-go that we're going to be reviewing subject to this legislation.
And there's no, they're not
So we do not have
retroactive
anything
to
apply.
anything
No.
that's there. Okay, that's all I had.
And
Any-
they don't go into effect just yet, so
Right.
we do have a little bit of time.
January 1st, right?
Actually, these two are, I believe, July 1st.
Okay,
So the state did give us a little bit of breathing room.
okay, good.
I got a couple questions. My first hair went up on the back of my head as far as our economic development corridor. So Hahn Road, the low side is within 500 feet, right? So that's out. So they couldn't build along the freeway on between Scott and Newport, right? On the Hahn side, the east side of Hahn, right? That would be excluded?
Generally, half of those properties, right?
Half of
So
those.
I want to say we're about 1,000 feet once you get to Hahn.
So how does that work if there's one parcel owner that owns the whole parcel? Would he have to subdivide to utilize this?
No, so the specific language, the PowerPoint's a summary, but the specific language is that no housing in the project can be within 500 feet of the freeway. So if you have it as open space or a park,
That's okay.
might be fair game.
Yeah. My whole point in asking these is preserving the EDC. So west of Hahn is open game then. Okay, so the second question, if, for example, in EDC, we do not allow even though technically we allow housing, but it's only in a mixed use and vertical only, we've just changed that. But if we didn't want it there, could they force a ministerial action on that property west of Hahn in the EDC?
Yes, so for AB 2011, which is the 100% affordable housing provision, yes. However, for SB 6, we have that exception where we can locate a different parcel and say, hey, you can build it here.
So my thought comes to mind is that, I can't remember the name of it, it's the project we denied a couple months ago. It was all housing apartments, it was on the west side of Hahn, it was just north of, what was the name of that project?
Mill Creek.
Mill Creek. So if Mill Creek had put all affordable housing in there and they complied with this, we could not have stopped it then.
Yes.
Oh, that sucks. Okay. So, so generally speaking, again, we just saw this and I haven't, I'll be eating this law up here pretty soon, studying it, but if an area does not allow housing, it simply just says retail only, they can still come in here. So basically the land use designation is irrelevant if it meets all the criteria of 100% affordable, yada, 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 right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting sicker by the minute. Okay, mixed use. There's the verbiage in there about the mixed use. The problem we had on that project was he called it mixed use and he threw 90% housing and then 2 stores in the front. is this defined mixed use, because you talked about the lower floor, is it only vertical, or is it horizontal and vertical?
No, so the retail is only on the first floor. So we can only mandate that half of the first floor, half of the ground floor be retail, but not the whole building.
So could they put technically 2 buildings of retail in the front and then all housing in the back, all floors?
If it meets that objective standard,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. And then, I can't read my writing, are most, okay, so prevailing wage, that question. Are most of the projects that we've been approving, or how many, I should say, percentage, are any of them been prevailing wage? So all the tracks we've been approving, they're not prevailing wage. Any of the daycares, the commercial, the restaurants, nothing's been prevailing wage, right? So that is kind of a deterrent because that really jacks the cost up. They would have to really want it to have prevailing wage. Okay.
So typically for affordable housing projects, they often obtain or receive state and federal money, and so they
Yeah.
have to comply with prevailing wage anyway. So a lot of affordable housing developers are used to complying with that. Now for the mixed use requirements, or for example, under SB 6, that is not so typical. It really depends on the jurisdiction. For example, the city of LA has kind of stronger, for example, union presence, and so that might happen more. But typically, our projects do not meet that requirement unless it's a public project.
Okay, last question. Well, both of them use prevailing wage, both of these acts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So last question is, in your opinion, speaking of the EDC between Scott and Newport, how much of that are we in danger of losing to housing? Because I haven't studied all the requirements, and all the different outs that are in this law, but Cheryl, how do you see us getting a project being forced down our throat in that EDC portion there with one of these?
There is the potential, yes.
But based on the prevailing wage and based on all the other criteria, is it a big leap for them to do it, or do you see economically it's feasible?
I don't see an immediate rush to this, and I'm basing that determination on previous legislation that has gone into effect over the last couple of years, particularly SB 35, that gave additional provisions for ministerial approval if you had a prevailing wage provision in the project, and we have not seen those types of applications come to fruition here in Menifee yet. Certainly this is of concern to us here. I think it's an egregious stretch from the state to eliminate local land use control, which of course is a difficult thing to accept. And certainly, that's why we're so interested in this legislation. We wanted to share this with you. We submitted several letters of opposition on both of these, major pieces to the state as it went through the process. And we'll continue our analysis in terms of the provisions, the requirements, the exceptions, to make sure that we're fully prepared should an application come across the counter for one of these.
So another project, and I appreciate that. Another project, 2 thoughts. Number one, maybe for future agenda discussion, and the mayor's here. Thought putting in his head. For the EDC, perhaps we should look at easing restrictions or some kind of encouragement as far as planning requirements, whatever it is, to encourage other types of development to get it built before a bunch of those projects come in, whether it be fast tracking commercial permitting, lowering the fee by 50%, whatever needs to happen to encourage for example, the one on Hahn and Scott, where the quote Costco was supposed to go, the junction, whatever we have to do to get that thing built. If we can get those going before more housing legislation comes down the road, because we do not want to lose the EDC. So that would be a suggestion. Maybe we can bring that for another meeting and do a joint session with the council. To me, that would be a high priority. So that last one is, I remember there was a project here on Newport and Menifee, just adjacent to the Archibald. Is it Archibald's? that is commercial retail, but they wanted to put a senior housing rest home kind of thing in there. So is that project right there, with that parcel now, if someone wanted to put in this housing, it could be put in there, couldn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So, see, this is kind of scary because the residents came and spoke at that about not wanting a 3-story, rest home basically next to those nice homes right at their backyard. So I could see this becoming that situation. So again, we may want to do something to encourage commercial development. So this doesn't happen.
I will share, when the council recently approved our DIF update last month, there is a phase-in provision for commercial retail projects. So this has been something that's been on the radar that staff has, been looking at, and I think the council made that incentivization with the DIF fees. So for the first 5 years of the new DIF, it's a phase-in, and so there is a reduction to incentivize commercial retail.
Okay, very good. That's it.
Okay. Moving on. Any other additional comments?
I have more slides, but I
Okay.
don't know how to go back to it.
Okay.
There's more bad news.
It just keeps coming.
Oh, there it is. Okay, all right. Okay, the next one, accessory dwelling units, everyone's favorite, right? So this is the third time the state has come back with ADUs. So as an overview, they're getting rid of the sunset. If you recall, the ADU requirements were supposed to sunset in 2025. Those are gone now. And they're gonna have new height requirements as well as another deadline. And so currently the deadline for the 60-day review period is the city has to act on it, whatever that means, because no one knew what that really meant. And so now the state is requiring that the city actually approve or deny the application. And as you know, ADU applications under certain circumstances are, again, ministerial and done at the staff level. A denial would require a full set of written comments and remedies. And so, again, staff would have to be very thorough, talk about every single issue. ADUs can be converted from attached or detached garages. That's a kind of a clarification. ADUs and JDUs may be attached to a garage, not just converted within a detached garage. And there are new height thresholds above 16 feet. So previously, ADUs were maxed out at 16 feet high. The new provision states that for attached ADUs, it can go as high as 25 feet to really meet, or whatever the height of the main unit is. And there are a lot of things the city cannot do under these new changes. And so we can't impose non-objective standards. We can't, for example, prohibit at least an 800 square foot ADU with a 4-foot side and rear yard setback, for example. And we can't require parking requirements when an ADU application submitted for a new primary dwelling that would otherwise trigger a parking exception. And also, JDUs without separate bathrooms. JDUs are really a room, a fancy, a nicer room with a couple, like a bachelor stove or something like that. They don't have to have a separate bathroom, whereas an ADU does. And now they would have to have access to the main entry to get access to the bathroom. Again, I mentioned some of the height requirements. 2-story ADUs weren't so clear in the last update, and so now they're clarifying that they can. And you can also have 18 feet as a height for detached ADUs that's within half mile of a major transit stop, plus additional 2 feet for the roof pitch. So they're again kind of clarifying some of these requirements. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. These are going to impact, I would think these would impact HOAs also, because I know HOAs had to change their bylaws to accommodate the ADU, JDUs. And so how's this going to?
Well, fortunately, the mandates don't just apply to the city. This law did not exempt HOAs. The requirements on HOAs stay the same as the last update.
Okay, thank you. So it's coming down the pike for them too, so they'll probably see it from their legal people.
Yep.
See those also. Okay, thank you.
If you could just remind me, so they're allowing them to build these ADUs and JDUs. Someone builds one of these, it's usually either to, quote, have a family member live in it for free or as a rental. What is the rental rules on ADUs? Just broadly.
Yeah, so no short-term rentals. JADUs require owner occupancy. So, you know, I build a home, a JADU, my mom lives in it, and I have to live in it. ADUs do not require owner occupancy. So I can build an ADU, a detached ADU, I can rent out both. But they can't be short-term.
A JDU is ADU without a bathroom?
Yes, essentially, and it's smaller.
Okay, and you cannot rent JDUs?
No,
Okay, and if it's an ADU, it has to be a long-term rental?
yes, more than 30 days.
Okay, I know someone that has a house that they added on when grandma was there. She's now dead. When she was alive, she lived in, it had a bedroom, full kitchen, living room. But it was basically, they just added on 15 feet to the house. But it has a separate entrance and everything. Is that considered an ADU, or is it considered part of the house?
So that probably falls under the JADU definition because it doesn't have its own bathroom.
No, it does have it. It has a full shower, bathroom, everything.
Oh, and kitchen?
Everything. It's a mini house.
Yeah, a mini house is an ADU.
An ADU.
Even though in the past it's called granny flat,
Yeah.
in-law suite, casita,
Yeah.
ADU is the correct terminology.
And they can rent it as long as it's not B&B kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay, that's okay.
Ty, before you go on, I just wanted to mention that the ADU laws in particular are going to require additional code updates to the municipal code. So staff is preparing those now. So here early on next year, you'll see another municipal code update for compliance with all of this new legislation.
And of course, at that code update, we're going to address the things I brought up at the last meeting, right?
We'll talk about that further, yes.
Okay, trying to get back to the power. You don't have control of that. Oh, I thought I had more
IT,
power.
can we get the PowerPoint? Thank you.
Okay, so now AB 2234 expands on the Housing Accountability Act and its post-entitlement phase permits. Okay, what are those? You know, anything that's an entitlement, you know, kind of CUP, all that stuff, right? That's the entitlement. That's what they can build. But after we get the entitlement, you have to do grading plans, building permits, all of that stuff. That's what this addresses. And essentially, it mandates, again, that staff creates a checklist, follows very strict timelines, and really provide the developer who's building clear instructions or clarify the issues as well as remedies for fixing any of those issues. This will begin January 1st, 2023, and it has a online permitting system required beginning in 2024. Luckily, the city's already been ahead of the curve on that and has already been working on updating that online permitting requirement. So, as I mentioned, it really is non-discretionary permits anyway. Building, grading, the stuff that engineering and is usually doing already. But it doesn't include any discretionary discretionary permits or other permits subject to the Permit Streamlining Act. Or permits from other jurisdictions, like if they need AQMD or something like that, it doesn't apply here. So as I mentioned, when the city receives an application, they have to list in detail all of the requirements. They have to post examples on this online portal of types of developments and what it would look like, and getting ready to get that up and running by January 1st, 2024. Okay. And also, just as a reminder, like many of the other mandates, you can't mandate something that is not listed, and you can't require changes if you don't mention the issue in the first place. It's really, you get one shot and you better be as thorough as possible. Any questions on that? staff, we already had a meeting today and they are on it. Okay, and so these are just a handful of other legislation that you will see. So the first is the open space element that the city must update by January 1st, 2026, and to really address stuff as climate resilience, co-benefits of open space, and all of that would be correlated with the land use element. We have to update our circulation element by January 1st, 2025. Excuse me, if we do any updates to our circulation element on or after that date, we have to discuss issues like bicycle plans, pedestrian plans, and traffic calming plans, and how to implement it within a 25-year time frame. And that is it for some of the updates that we're gonna have, and we'll keep the city updated and work with staff as necessary. Thank you.
Mm,
Good job.
yeah.
That's a lot. I'm surprised you guys get any actual work done
Yeah.
beyond all that stuff. Wow.
Lots of updates. You know that. Okay, if there are other comments, I'm going to ask the clerk if there are any requests to speak on this item, or if anybody in the audience would like to make a comment on this.
I have no requests to speak.
Okay. Can you come up to the podium, state your name? And, yes, thank you.
Gabriella, so I have a quick question in regards to the ADU unit. On a residential home, is it a specific lot size that's required, or is it just from the actual main unit to like the back wall? I'm kind of just trying to picture it.
Are you talking about setbacks?
Yeah, is it a setback or is it like the, because I know that in residential homes, they're now allowed, like it doesn't have to be on like this giant piece of property. So for example, like my home is like 5,200 square feet in the backyard. So would that be allowed as long as the setback is within the 4 feet requirement?
That is correct. There's no minimum lot size that's required to build an ADU.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other comments? Discussion items on this? Okay, well, thank you for that presentation. Looking forward to all the work. Yeah, good
Didn't
job.
mean to
Thank you.
scare everyone, but here we are. Merry Christmas,
Yes.
everyone. It's my
Always.
gift to you.
Always, yes, always. Yes, the community thanks you. Okay, we'll move on to item 11. It's our Community Development Director comments. You have any comments?
Thank you,
Please.
Chair, Commissioners, members of the public. I do have just a couple of announcements to share. I wanted to put on the radar that the city is updating our 5-year strategic plan, and we are doing community outreach as part of that work effort. Concurrent with tonight's meeting, we had a virtual community input session. This item, we do have information on our website. I'm sorry I don't have a slide, but there's a QR code. There is specific information on the city's website under strategic planning. So just encouraging the community to provide their input as we develop that 5-year plan, which will really guide the work efforts of staff. This is something that the council has done over the last 5 years, and so getting something on that strategic plan really helps guide us in knowing what our priorities are as we move forward. Also wanted to announce our next meeting isn't until January 11th. City Hall will be closed for the holidays, the week of the holiday, December 23rd, and reopening on January 2nd. So with that, wanted to wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday season. And we look forward to jumping right back in January, looking at implementing all these wonderful new pieces of legislation and continuing the good work here. So thank you.
Yes. Was that smile genuine? Okay, great. Any questions for the Community Development Director? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to Commissioner reports on committee activities. Any reports to Vice Chair Ledoux?
We're going to have next week, we'll decide the Citizen of the Year, I think on the 20th. So we'll be going through the council's selections. I think there's 10 people to choose from, so we're doing that next week.
Any other meetings? None? Okay, moving on to future agenda items. Do we have any items that we'd like future agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to agendize the discussion of potential changes to motivate development. Agendize a discussion on potential changes to motivate commercial and retail development.
Thank you. Particularly the EDC, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but
Okay.
any significant spaces we want to protect.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I shall adjourn.
Was there a second on that?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I have to vote on that. You get a first and a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we're going to move to adjourn the meeting at 7:23 p.m. Thank you all, and happy holidays to all.